welcome to the JD Power Travel Podcast. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the Managing Director of Travel Hospitality and Retail at JD Power. And with me today is the woman who runs the hotel study for us. It's Andrea Stokes. Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
And Andrea, you're just back from vacation, and we're going to talk about several topics. I think today's main topic is going to be basically the current state of travel, and then also some little bit of forecast looking towards the Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday seasons, because we do get an awful lot of inquiry about that from the media and other folks here at JD Power. So, Andrea, you're just back from vacation. Was there anything that happened to you that was illustrative of the current environment?
Well, one flight delay. It was a several-hour delay, so getting to your hotel at 3 a.m. is not fun. But I suppose we could say that is probably, a very minor problem to have, given the high demand and the how overtaxed I think the system is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but otherwise it was a great trip. Of course, being in the travel industry, it's always great to see hotels that are full and busy airports, full flights. I experienced all of that.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I will have to say, if folks don't keep up with some of the minutia, some of the things that strike me is I recently flew through Heathrow on my way to Scotland, and I had some hassles that weren't really necessarily related to any of the current travel conditions, but the airline I was flying couldn't check people in for about 90 minutes, and we missed our outbound flight, which was a big hassle. But that's just a personal thing that had nothing to do with the macro scene. But however, the part of the macro scene was getting at Heathrow, where it was at capacity. They had more actual people in the Heathrow buildings than any other time in the history of Heathrow. To give you an idea of what the capacity problems are that we're currently experiencing. There's just very high demand, relatively few aircraft flying, which means that people are going to get on an aircraft and it's going to be very full. And because the aircraft is full and there are fewer of them, they are filling up the airports at certain hours of the day. So that is certainly something I've witnessed. So, Andrea, my first question for you is, how are hoteliers coping with all of this? What's the current situation look like?
Well, definitely, hoteliers are raising room rates, and they're able to get those higher rates due to the high demand. I think, some hoteliers are pushing rate as much as possible, of course, to make up for the lack of demand that we had, in 2020 and going into 2021. So it's understandable. So far, guests are responding to higher rates. Yes, they're paying them because they're not willing to kind of give up those vacations and give up those trips that maybe they've been planning for a long time. But our hotel guest satisfaction study results, which were released in July, does show dissatisfaction with, kind of that value for money component. Guests are paying more for an experience that, is still probably not back to the hotel experience maybe that they were used to before the pandemic. So they are, guests are showing dissatisfaction in some segments. And that's directly related to kind of those higher room rates that they're paying.
Yeah, I can say that we're going to be showing some graphs in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks at the Future Travel Experience Expo or conference. I don't know how I actually call it. But we'll be presenting some data there that show basically the same thing, that satisfaction is on its way down, mostly as a result of crowding in the airports. And of course, the calculus is that if your airport's empty, you're more likely to have a more satisfying experience. You're going to park closer to the building. You're going to go through security faster, and it won't take you as long to get on the aircraft. And once you're on the aircraft, that middle seat will more than likely be empty when there is no one in the airport. But we're having exactly the opposite problem now, which are overcrowding and the stretching of the capacity limit, as I just mentioned with Heathrow. Heathrow is not exactly an exciting place to be when you can't find a seat in a restaurant, which was exactly what we experienced. I think we went to it was the fifth restaurant that we went to where two of us could actually sit down. And that's the current situation. So, and also I'd reflect also that something you said about rising costs. Airlines, of course, are, increasing fares for a couple to meet that demand, and also the ability that they have to fill an aircraft. They're more likely to fill the aircraft, and that's going to make those last 10, 12, 20 seats more expensive. And of course, the cost of fuel is, I think it's up something like 60 or 70% from where it was in 2019. So it is more expensive to travel. The other part of it I would mention about airlines is, again, the capacity problem they've got. The question I get most from the media these days is, what's it going to be like in Thanksgiving and then sometimes Christmas? So, Andrea, what's your outlook for the hotel business during the holiday periods coming up?
Well, given that gas prices have gone down a little bit, I do think it's going to be a big holiday travel season. Many people do drive to their destinations over the holidays. In fact, most people will drive, but many will be staying in hotels during that time. So I imagine that hoteliers can still kind of keep up those higher rates because, again, we're looking at holidays where people may not have been able to spend time with family over the past 2 years. So I think that it's just going to be a very busy holiday season. Even last holiday season in 2021, right? It was very, very busy. So I can imagine the same for this holiday season. I really don't see it getting any better. I'm not sure about airlines, Mike. Are they planning on adding flights, adding aircraft?
Well, they would like to. I don't think they're going to be able to. The constraining factor here is who's qualified to fly the aircraft. And they don't have enough of those folks as much as they would want. And one of the issues is a long-term problem. Why don't we have more pilots flying? One of them's a long-term problem. The FAA requires, I believe it's 1,500 hours to qualify as a co-pilot for a commercial jet. Prior to 2003 or 2008, I can't remember, it was quite a few years ago, the minimum requirement was 250 hours. So it's more than 6 times increased. And in typical, I will be a little critical of the FAA, as I have been in my career. It was a response to a small airline crash that happened in upstate New York, Colgan Air, and that may ring a bell with some people. But it was ascribed to pilot error. So the FAA said, well, let's just increase the number of hours required for someone to qualify to be a pilot, and that'll reduce that pilot error rate. But it turns out that the two, like pilot and the co-pilot for that Colgan Air crash, each had more than 2,000 hours of experience. So it didn't seem to really make much sense to increase it to 1,500. So that going from 250 to 1,500 has reduced the number of people who qualify and who have the resources in which to get those 1,500 hours, because no one's going to give you an aircraft to fly around for 1,500 hours. You've got to find a job, or pay for those hours to qualify. So that's been kind of a long-term drag on the number of airline pilots. Then during COVID, they offered a lot of pilots early retirement, which a lot of them took, with some certain packages and incentive packages associated with that. And they had slightly fewer, a smaller, much smaller number of people that they wouldn't allow to fly the aircraft because they refused to get inoculated. And that's led us to this current crisis at the moment. So to answer your question, Andrea, they'd like to add more flights. They're not going to be able to. They also, over the summertime, have kind of been hoping that things just worked out. The big swing factor here being weather. Normally, an airline will have pilots and crews in reserve at various places that if there's weather delays and the airline crew times out, they can't be flying 24 hours a day. The FAA won't let them, and you don't want a tired pilot and co-pilot running your aircraft. So during a weather delay, you're going to have a lot more people who time out and aren't allowed to fly that day. And normally you'd have a crew or so, or 2 or 3 at various places, just to hop on that aircraft and fly it to the next destination, say from O'Hare to Nashville. So they don't have those many people in O'Hare waiting around, if any. They were utilizing those people to actually fly planes that give them revenue. And then if they don't fly that plane from O'Hare to Nashville, that can't fly from Nashville to New York. And so once you have a weather delay, you have an exacerbated problem that rolls across the United States. So I like to say to people who ask about this that the big swing factors are, is there a storm over Atlanta or Chicago? And those two markets can really affect the entire nation. So, what they've learned, however, hopefully they're going to apply it during this holiday season. The airlines, have learned that they just cannot schedule that much. They've got to have some slack in the case that there are weather delays and other unforeseen circumstances that happen. And they just won't schedule as many aircraft as they normally would during the holiday period. So it's more likely that, once you get a ticket, if you haven't booked well in advance, you really should. But once you get a ticket, it's high probability that a flight will, actually occur. But you are going to find that it's going to be a 95 to 98% load factor, meaning 95% to 98% of the seats will be filled. And to give you an idea how they've coped with this in various other parts of the world, as I mentioned Heathrow before, Heathrow will have about 10,000 fewer flights over the next several months, simply because they just cannot schedule people to fly the aircraft. So if you haven't bought tickets for Thanksgiving, you really should start thinking about it right now. And if you have the wherewithal and the desire, you should be doing the same thing about booking airline tickets for Christmas. So, which brings up the last topic, or continuation of this topic. What does that holiday season look like, Andrea, for hotels? Do you think that, how will Christmas look? I mean, let's go really far out to Christmas and New Year's. Are there labor problems that'll still be present? Are they going to get better? Going to get worse at the hotels?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's similar to the airline industry, where there are, the labor issues are not quickly fixable or easily fixable. Hotels obviously are finding workers more than they were a year ago. But it's still, definitely not back to normal. Depending on the type of property it is, how well staffed it is, it will depend. But I do think it's an issue that is not going to be fixed overnight. In terms of the hospitality and even the restaurant industries.
Yeah, I had a media person ask me in a TV interview. He says, "Oh, come on, they must have been able to fix this problem by now." And my response was, "Well, you've picked the longest term possible problem for the airlines. You can't go out in the street and hire someone to fly a 737. That's impossible, and it would be idiotic to put someone who's unqualified in the pilot seat. So we're not going to be, again, it's a long-term problem. It's not going to be fixed anytime soon. And I did have a discussion with Tyson Jominy of JD Power, who has been mentioned before, I believe, on this podcast. He basically looked at fleet sales and things like that and other kinds of fleet issues for JD Power. And I was speaking to him about the rental car industry. I've heard from my rental car clients that they have, as one person put it, we basically solved our fleet problem. That we're backed up to about the same number of cars that we had before the pandemic, which I'm a little sanguine about that, or less than sanguine about that statement. However, the rental car prices are going to continue to be high, not as high as they were in the summertime period, but they still will remain higher than they were in 2019, simply because, again, we have fewer cars, higher demand. And it's going to be very spotty. It's only going to be in those markets in which there's destinations like, I believe you went to Orlando on your last vacation, Andrea, this one of the past week. I think you were in Orlando, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah. And that, did you rent a car down there or try to rent a car, or was it?
No, we did not. I frankly didn't even bother looking at that option, knowing what the issues would be,
Yes.
especially in a market like Orlando.
Yes, right.
There may have been cars available. I just never really looked, but I think I was probably afraid to look at rental cars. But a car would have come in handy while we were there for sure. But we ended up finding alternative transportation. So
Well, it's markets like Orlando that are destination markets for leisure travelers. You can have problems, but
right.
Another coworker and I, Christina Cooley, who runs the retail section of THR, she and I went to Chicago and we rented a very nice car that only had 9,000 miles on it. But that was in Chicago, which is not exactly a high demand leisure market. So you're going to, if you're planning to go visit, your aunt in Peoria, Illinois, it might be easier to find a rental car than it would be if you're planning to take your kids to Orlando or Las Vegas, for example. But anyway, that's the basic overview. Andrea, is there anything else you want to add as we exit out of this episode of the JD Power Travel Podcast?
No.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you back. So
thank you.
You're quite welcome. Glad to have you back. And once again, you've been listening to the JD Power Travel Podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about JD Power, you can go to jdpower.com and click on the upper right-hand corner and scroll down to business. And then you'll find travel under that business tab and find out about all the things that we have been doing lately and the things we can do for all the travel studies at JD Power. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.